The night sky was calm, filled with stars just like any other night. People on Earth looked up, never knowing what was about to happen. Above the quiet world, far beyond the moon, something moved. Huge shadows crossed the black of space. They were not meteors. They were not natural. They were ships not made by human hands. Silent and cold, they came closer. No warning, no message, no demand, only the hum of strange engines that had crossed the light years to find Earth. When the first light fell from the sky, no one understood. Children pointed at it like a shooting star. Lovers made wishes. Scientists tried to measure its speed. By the time they realized, it was too late. The light was not a star. It was fire. The first city vanished in seconds, swallowed by heat brighter than the sun. Towers turned to dust, streets cracked open, millions screamed, and then there was silence. The invaders had arrived. Across the globe, the story repeated. New York, Beijing, London. No matter the country, no matter the border, the sky opened and death fell. Governments tried to fight. Missiles launched. Fighter jets rose into the smoke. None of it mattered. The alien ships were shields of steel and energy. Human weapons cracked against them like glass. For every missile fired, 10 cities burned. For every plane launched, hundreds fell in flames. The world was ending, and no one knew why. The aliens never spoke. They never sent warnings. They never told humans what they wanted. They simply destroyed, as if Earth was nothing more than a target on a map. Scientists guessed they wanted the planet's water, its resources, maybe even the ground beneath human feet. Others thought it was something simpler: fear, a strike to remove a rival before it could rise. In the chaos, people ran. Families broke apart in the rush to escape. Trains were full, roads were blocked, oceans filled with boats carrying desperate souls. But there was no place safe. The sky was the enemy. Even underground bunkers shook as alien fire turned Earth to ash. Humanity screamed into the dark, but the dark gave no answer. In a command center deep below Washington, leaders watched the screens as the death count rose. They shouted, ordered, tried to organize defense. Nothing worked. The ships could not be tracked for long, their technology too strange, too far beyond human understanding. Radar went blind. Satellites died. Communication broke. Humanity was fighting shadows, and the shadows were winning. But even in the horror, even in the silence of burned cities, something survived. In the ruins, people pulled each other from fire. In the bunkers, soldiers swore oaths of revenge. In secret labs, scientists stared at alien wreckage, small pieces that had fallen when one ship moved too close to Earth's atmosphere. Humanity was bleeding, but it was not broken. The aliens thought Earth was weak. They thought the fire would make humans kneel. But humans were not made for kneeling. Pain was fuel. Fear became anger. Anger became unity. For the first time in history, all of Earth was one. No borders, no politics, no nations. Only humans. One boy, standing on a hill where his city once lived, looked at the red sky and whispered words the world would soon repeat. They struck first. We will strike last. As weeks passed, the aliens slowed their fire. Maybe they thought the work was done. Maybe they believed Earth was finished. But deep below mountains, inside old bunkers and broken cities, plans were forming. People who had lost everything were now ready to risk everything. Soldiers who once fought for countries now fought for humanity. Scientists who built for peace now built for war. The invaders had lit a fire, and that fire spread. Every survivor carried it in their eyes. A promise. A warning. Humanity was not going to vanish quietly. The first strike had destroyed cities, had taken millions, had burned the sky itself. But it had also awakened something ancient, something powerful, something the aliens could never measure on their screens. It awakened the human spirit, and when the spirit of humanity rises, it does not stop. It learns, it adapts, it endures. The aliens thought Earth was easy prey. They were wrong. Because even in the ashes, even in the dark, even in the silence after fire, there was a voice that spoke, soft at first, then louder, carried across ruined cities. carried across every broken home. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. The invaders did not know it yet, but by striking Earth, they had made their greatest mistake. They had created something they could not kill. They had created a united humanity, and soon, the stars themselves would tremble. The world had gone quiet after the first strikes. A silence that was not peace but exhaustion. Smoke hung above cities like dark clouds frozen in place, and everywhere people walked through rubble with eyes that no longer expected rescue. Yet in that heavy silence, something small began to move, like a spark finding dry wood. Humanity was broken, yes, but not gone. And the more the invaders believed their work was finished, the more the survivors began to whisper to one another that it was not over. Not yet. In the ruins of an old subway station, groups of men and women gathered in the half-light. Some had uniforms, most did not. Some had guns, others carried only tools or scraps. But they all shared the same eyes, red with grief, black with determination. A teacher who had lost her classroom and her students stood before them. Her voice was calm, though her hands shook. "They think Earth is dead," she said. "They think we are finished, but we are still breathing. And while we breathe, we fight." No one cheered. They only nodded because cheering felt too small for what was now required. Across the ocean, deep inside a mountain bunker built decades before, for another kind of war, an old mechanic uncovered machines that had never been finished, rusted steel frames, batteries that should have been useless, coils that hummed when patched together with copper wire and stubborn hope. The mechanic's name was Ortiz, and his back ached with every step. But when one of his strange devices let out a pulse that made an alien drone fall from the sky like a dead bird, he laughed until tears ran down his face. Around him, younger men and women shouted in relief. They had something now, a weapon not found in any book. It was clumsy, heavy, and half-built, but it worked. And if one worked, more could be made. Far above, in an observatory where the dome had cracked and glass littered the floor, a young astronomer named Ilya watched the sky with what little equipment still functioned. He did not look for stars anymore. He watched the ships. He tracked their patrols, their pauses, the rhythm of their movements. Machines might not sleep, but crews did. Patterns formed, habits slipped through. He drew circles on old maps marking windows of time where the sky was thinner, where a ship left its position for a few breaths too long. He showed his findings to others, and they believed. Not because they fully understood, but because he spoke with the certainty of someone who had studied the stars all his life. If he said there was a gap, there was a gap. On the coasts, survivors dragged wrecked boats from beaches and patched them with anything they could find. The ships were ugly and crooked, with armor plates cut from old trucks and engines rebuilt from junkyard scraps. They looked like they should sink the moment they touched the sea. But they floated, and they were fast, and they could carry the humming cages Ortiz had made. That was enough. People painted names on their sides with shaking hands, names like Memory, Revenge, Dawn, and Home. Underground, in tunnels lit by lanterns, people built something else. Trust. It came slow at first, across different languages, across faces that had once been divided by nations and borders. But disaster had erased those lines. A farmer showed city people how to grow food in damp corners. A coder with a cracked laptop linked old radios into a single network. A child drew suns on scraps of paper and handed them to soldiers too tired to smile. Every small act was another stone in a wall against despair. And slowly, people began to feel that they were not alone. The aliens noticed the noise. Their scanners picked up strange signals. Their patrols found traces of movement, but it was all scattered, confusing, like chasing smoke in a storm. For every camp they destroyed, 3 more sprang up in silence. For every drone they sent, 1 went missing. What they did not understand was that humans were not fighting as an army anymore. They were fighting as a swarm, as weather, as fire that slipped through cracks. They had lost the world above, but they had taken the world below, and the world below was patient. One night, a message spread through the underground radio net. The voice was low and steady, belonging to a man who once had been a pilot, call sign Hound. "They are hunters," he said. "But hunters can be hunted. They will expect us to act like prey. We will not. We will strike where they do not look. We will move like shadows, like storms. We will teach them fear." His words carried across broken cities, through caves, and cellars across oceans. No one clapped, no one shouted. They simply returned to their work with new strength in their arms. When the first convoy moved, the sea was black with smoke, and the sky glowed red from fires burning hundreds of miles away. The convoy consisted of one stripped cargo ship, escorted by boats built from desperation and anger. They carried Ortiz's humming cages in their bellies. The engines were cloaked by crude tricks, barrels of freezing liquid spilling into the sea to hide their heat. Above them, alien lights passed, cold and perfect. The people on the decks lay flat, holding their breath, praying the stars would not notice them. Once a baby cried and the mother covered her child with her own body. The light swept by, the convoy lived. Midway across the water, a drone appeared, scanning with blue fire. One of the cages lit with a low growl, and the drone fell as if struck by an invisible hand. The people did not cheer. They pushed harder, driving forward, carrying the weapon that could make drones drop and ships stumble. They knew more would come, and louder and stronger, but for the first time since the invasion began, the enemy had blinked. On land, a group of teenagers scavenged old satellite dishes, convinced they could twist alien signals into failure. Everyone thought it foolish until the third night, when their dish hummed and a drone overhead suddenly drifted in the wrong direction before catching itself. The teens stared at each other, breathless. "Again," one whispered, and they did it again. Tior. First deliberate strike came at dawn. 3 boats sped across a bay, carrying launchers made from pipes and wires, guided by chips stolen from children's toys. Their target was an alien tower on a cliff, a tower that made human radios useless and gave the invaders clean sight of the sky. The boats wove across the waves as drones descended. Ortiz's cages growled, and drones fell one by one into the sea. The rockets wobbled but struck, tearing holes in the tower's smooth skin. Smoke poured out, then light, then fire. The tower leaned as if bowing, then crumbled into the sea. The boats turned and vanished before the larger ships could arrive. Behind them, the broken tower smoldered. Across the world, radios carried the news, voices shaking with something long forgotten. Not victory, not yet, but proof. Proof that humans could fight back. Proof that the invaders could bleed. Proof that survival was not only possible, but certain, if they refused to stop. That day, in a ruined school, a nurse opened a box of medicine that had traveled across 3 countries by hand. Inside, beneath the bandages and bottles, was a child's drawing of a sun. On the back it said, "We are still here." She taped it to the wall, and everyone who saw it felt something brighter than fire. The aliens would answer soon. The punishment would be hard. Everyone knew it. But knowledge was not fear. Knowledge was a weapon. And as night fell again, the hidden flame glowed brighter. No longer only a whisper, but a quiet promise spoken by thousands of voices in 1,000 places. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The first strike had left Earth scarred. The hidden flame had grown in silence, and now the time came when humanity would no longer wait in shadows. The invaders had expected surrender, but what rose from the ashes was defiance sharper than any blade. From ruined cities and secret bunkers, from dockyards and mountains, the survivors prepared not only to defend but to strike back. The counterattack was not one great battle at first. It was a storm of small ones, sharp and fast, designed to show the enemy that humans had teeth. It began on the edge of the moon, where alien patrols moved with lazy confidence. They believed Earth's people were broken, that the skies above were their own. But the astronomer Ilya had watched their movements for weeks, marking their blind spots and timing their pauses. In one of those gaps, a human-built craft emerged. It was not sleek, not beautiful, not advanced. It was patched together from old rockets, scrap hulls, stolen circuits, and pure desperation. Inside, pilots sat strapped into chairs bolted to steel, hands trembling but steady as they guided their machine into the void. The aliens saw them too late. By the time scanners locked, the human ship had already fired a pulse from Ortiz's humming device. The nearest drone spiraled out of control, colliding with another. Two perfect machines burned into silent wreckage, drifting across the black. Humanity had drawn first blood. On Earth, in cities still glowing from fire, whispers of the moonstrike spread like wildfire. It was proof that the invaders could be touched. Children who had hidden in basements now drew pictures not only of suns, but of ships with human flags flying over them. Soldiers who had thought only of defense now spoke of attack. The hidden flame was no longer hidden. It roared in the hearts of millions. The counterattack did not wait for rest. In the asteroid belt, human ships, small, ugly, fast, darted among rocks. They were guided by miners who once dug stone and ore for industry, now using the belt as their battlefield. The invaders sent patrol ships to chase them, but the humans had mapped every stone, every shadow, every spin of rock. They slipped behind, asteroids and launched missiles from blind spots, making the enemy fire into empty space. One alien ship broke apart under the impact of explosives wrapped around mining drills, a weapon so crude it should have been laughable. Yet when it tore through the alien hull, spilling fire into the void, laughter came from human throats for the first time in months. Every battle was costly. Every strike was met with harsh retaliation. Villages burned, oceans boiled where enemy fire struck, but the more they punished, the more the swarm of humanity adapted. They did not fight like an empire. They fought like survivors. They struck and vanished again, forcing the enemy to fight shadows. The invaders were powerful, but power without fear is brittle. For the first time, they began to feel uncertainty. A battle above Earth's orbit proved that point. 3 alien ships descended, expecting to crush a convoy of human craft. Instead, they found themselves surrounded. Human vessels erupted from the dark side of the planet, hidden by old debris fields. Crude weapons flashed. Explosives lashed against shields. The humming devices roared, bending signals making drones drop from the sky. One alien ship turned its cannons downward to strike the surface, but its systems faltered, confused by noise that made Earth itself appear as a dozen false worlds. Human rockets found its engines. Flames erupted. The ship staggered like a wounded beast, then fell, dragging fire through the atmosphere, crashing into the ocean with a roar that shook the coastlines. For the first time, the world watched an alien titanfall. The oceans boiled around it, waves higher than towers, but still people gathered on the shores to see the impossible, proof of alien defeat. The invaders had thought humans too weak to rise. Now they realized humans could turn every weakness into strength. Children carried messages between cells. Farmers turned fields into fuel depots. Mechanics built ships out of broken cars and old planes. Every part of Earth became a weapon. And, as the counterattack grew, so did the hunger in human hearts. They no longer dreamed of only surviving. They dreamed of chasing the enemy back to the stars. The aliens changed their tactics. They tightened patrols, sent heavier ships, unleashed weapons that scorched entire regions in seconds. Yet every move they made only fed human resolve. For every city burned, 10,000 voices cried out for vengeance. For every ship lost, engineers built 3 more. For every life taken, the survivors swore the memory would be repaid. The invaders had come to break the human spirit, but they had forged it instead into something unbreakable. The turning point came in the battle known simply as the Red Orbit. A fleet of alien ships gathered above Earth, preparing to strike what they believed was the last human stronghold. But the stronghold was bait. Guided by Ilya's calculations, human ships poured out of shadow, armed with weapons designed by Ortiz's team, carrying explosives strapped by bare hands. They attacked from all angles, too close for the aliens' massive cannons to aim. They fought like wolves circling giants, tearing pieces away. The battle lasted hours. Fire turned the orbit red. Debris rained down like metal rain. When it ended, the sky was not empty but filled with wreckage. Alien wreckage. Only fragments of their fleet limped away. Humanity had won its first true victory. News of the red orbit spread across every shelter, every tunnel, every hidden camp. People wept, not from sorrow, but from pride. For the first time since the first strike, hope was not a fragile whisper but a roar that shook the earth. Hope became belief. Belief became fury, and fury became unity so strong that no force in the stars could unmake it. The counterattack was no longer survival. It was the beginning of something greater. Humanity had learned to strike, and now it would not stop. The invaders, who had once seen Earth as prey, now faced a predator that would never forgive, never forget, and never stop. Hunting, they struck Earth first. But now the sky belonged to humans, and the war had only just begun. The red orbit changed the air itself, as if hope had a smell, as if victory left a taste. People woke with lighter steps, and yet they also woke with heavier tasks. The war did not end. It widened. The enemy pulled back from Earth's low sky and dug in along the high lanes, anchoring their larger ships around the moon and along the dark rivers between planets. Humanity followed. The hidden flame became industry, and industry became a storm. Factories rose from ruins like teeth. Power lines crept across broken neighborhoods and into tunnels that became assembly halls. Ortiz oversaw rows of humming cages, refined into neat modules, each one smaller, louder, hungrier. He taught with stained hands and a voice that never lifted, and crews learned faster because time itself seemed thinner now. A bad weld meant a dead pilot, a faulty coil meant a lost ship. They learned to make things right the first time, and when they could not, they learned to make the second time arrive in minutes. Mara no longer used the cracked subway map. Her table was a patched star chart covered in strings and pins, gaps Ilya had marked as windows, and wide red arcs drawn by pilots who had flown too close and returned with heat scars across their hulls. She slept for an hour at a time, cheek against the paper, waking to a world that moved whether she moved or not. Command did not mean control. It meant listening to 1,000 soft truths and finding the one hard line through them. Hound became the voice of distance. He spoke before launches and after returns, sometimes with words, sometimes with long silences that told crews he was still there. He stopped naming losses. Names were for memory walls, for quiet corners where hands traced etched letters. On the net, he spoke of routes, of timing, of breathing. "You will feel the ship shiver," he said once, as fleets waited beneath the moon. That is not fear. That is the ship learning. Crews repeated it like a blessing. Ships learned. Humans taught them by refusing to die. The war spread to Mars as if history had been waiting. Old domes cracked by dust storms became docks. Human ships kissed the red ground with landing struts welded from streetlight poles. On the horizon, alien relay towers blinked cold blue. The first skirmishes there were quiet, fought by miners, and engineers in suits patched with tape, knives pressed into joints the aliens had thought no one would ever touch. Blood dried the same on 2 planets. Word of Mars reached Earth's tunnels as a rumor that tasted like iron. We can live there. We can fight there. We can win there. In the belt, the miners wrote new hymns to rock and momentum. They chained explosives to tumbling stone and taught the asteroids to punch. A perfect plan failed when a rock cracked wrong and split the wave of fire. A clumsy plan worked when a pilot ignored the book and rode a spinning boulder like a rodeo rider, counting heartbeats until the right line appeared, then kicking free and leaving death to carry itself into an enemy hangar. No one could run simulations faster than instinct. Instinct was a simulation that never stopped. The teenagers with the dish did not stop either. They moved their makeshift lab to a mountain where the wind felt clean. They learned the enemies, music by smashing it, by lowering notes until drones drifted, by raising notes until shields flickered like sick lights. They discovered that a fraction of a second mattered more than any speech. They laughed like thieves whenever a giant fell because of a tone only a child could hear with fresh ears. The nurse with the drawing of the sun built a ward that never slept. She taught volunteers to clean wounds with boiled water and to count quiet breaths during long nights. She spread a rule across the net. We do not break to win. We do not become what we kill. It traveled far, and sometimes it held a pilot's hand on the wrong switch, kept a blade away from a prisoner's throat. Sometimes it did not. War is a river that carries pieces of a person downstream. The nurse fought to pull them back. Some came back coughing. Some did not. The invaders adapted. Their drones grew teeth in places where cages once bit cleanly. Their ships layered their senses, mixing heat with gravity with something no human could name. They changed patrol routes so often that Ilya's circles smeared like fingerprints. He stopped marking windows and started marking probabilities. This path hurts less, he told Mara, and she nodded, and Hound flew crews through paths that hurt, because pain was not a message anymore. It was the road. There were victories. A refinery on a gray moon went dark after saboteurs crawled through vents that tasted like old oil and bitter air. A convoy of alien gunships turned on each other when the teenagers' tones convinced their friend or foe systems to see only foe. Ortiz's newest cages burped a note that made a destroyer freeze long enough for 5 rockets to plant themselves, like seeds along its spine. The destroyer bloomed into light and fell apart like a bad promise. There were losses. A fleet missed a window and opened their hatches to vacuum because the alternative was fire. A hospital ship drifted for 3 hours while its engines argued with themselves and then died under a blue beam that cut it neatly in half. The nurse etched names into metal until the metal ran out. Then she etched them into stone. On Earth, a factory town became a legend. It had no name. It had a rhythm. A bell rang every 2 hours. When the bell rang, people swapped jobs without a word. Welders became haulers. Haulers became cooks. Cooks became cleaners. Cleaners became welders. Children slept in shifts between machines that purred like giant cats. Soot streaked across their cheeks like war paint. The town built a ship every 18 hours. The ships were not pretty. They flew. That was enough. The enemy tried to cut the rhythm by hitting power grids with needles of black lightning. The town answered with hand-cranked dynamos and pedals on generator bikes. "We are the grid," someone scrawled on a wall. The words appeared across 3 continents within a week. On a night that tasted like metal and smoke, Mara stood beneath, a sky that finally showed stars thin and sharp. The air raid had rolled past, leaving the ground trembling, but the stars remained. She closed her eyes and pictured lines between them. Not the constellations of old myths, but corridors for ships. Places where blue beams could not bend easily. Where a cage could hum and hold. Where Hound could slip in close enough to smell the enemy's breath. She opened her eyes and pointed at 3 spots on Ilya's chart. "Here," she said. "And here. And here. If we cut these, their net collapses." Ilya pushed his glasses up with a finger smudged by graphite. "They will expect us to cut the most important line," he said. "So we cut the small ones first. We make the big line work too hard. It will fray." He drew a little moon beside a corridor. "This one hides a heat well. We can park there and pretend to be stone." Ortiz wheeled in a crate with 6 cages stacked like loaves of bread. "These sing," he said simply. "Do not stand too close." Someone asked what the song was made of. Ortiz shrugged. "Stubbornness," he said, and went back to the shop. The plan for the long night took shape without speeches. It was a braid of raids across 3 days that would feel like one. Teams would hit relays and refineries and data spines until the enemy's sight blurred. Then a spear would drive for the throat. A carrier that housed command for this arm of the invasion. No one knew if the carrier could die. They decided to find out. The long night began with lights going out in places that had glowed blue for months. Far moons blinked dark. Drones stuttered and bumped into each other like confused birds. The teenagers tuned their dish until it hummed like a cathedral full of bees. On Mars, miners lit fuses and hid under ridges, faces pressed to red, dust praying through gritted teeth. Rocks fell up, then down, then up again, as explosions made the ground forget its own direction. A relay tower went sideways and never found upright again. Hound's spear ran the last corridor with breaths measured in numbers. In 2, you'll feel the shiver, he said. Let it pass through you. The carrier loomed like a city turned. On its side, lights rippling across a hull that drank starlight. Cages sang. Shields trembled. The first human rockets kissed the carrier's skin and died without marks. The second wave bit deeper, leaving black kisses that spread like mold. The third wave carried drills that screamed as they ate metal. The ship's bones groaned. Inside, something old and precise became uncertain. The carrier turned its mouth toward the spear and exhaled a wind of particles that stripped paint and memory. 3 ships went blind. 2 remembered the sky by touch alone and tucked themselves under the carrier's jutting plates, close enough to see seams, close enough to plant gifts. Hound's voice frayed and held. Closer, he said, as if he could push them with will. Closer still. A beam swept and caught a ship named Memory. The hull boiled. The pilot, a woman who had learned to fly by carrying bread across front lines, kept the nose steady long enough to drive her last rocket into a joint where plates met like teeth. The carrier flinched. A sound like a wounded bell rolled across the corridor. In the factory town, the bell on the wall answered by accident, as if the sound had gone around and come home. On Earth, the nurse set a cup of water beside a boy with a bandaged chest. He asked if the stars were winning. She thought about how the sky had no sides. We are learning, she said. Learning is a kind of winning.